Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome to today's remote meeting of the Children and Learning Committee on Tuesday, the 21st of September. Moving on with the agenda, item 1, apologies and substitutes.
Yes, Convener, we have an apology from Councillor Boyd, also an apology from Councillor King, with Councillor Duff substituting.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 2, declaration.
Sorry, Convener, can I just put in apologies from Councillor Laurie?
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Had connection difficulties. He's unable to.
Will he joining us if you can get connected, will he?
He hasn't said. It was just a quick message to say that he was having some trouble, but I'm sure he'll be here if he can.
Yeah, we'll just keep an eye out for that. Thank you, Councillor Speed. Okay, item 2, declarations of interest. Nope, none. Excellent. We'll press on now with agenda item number 3, items to authorise a previous meeting which was submitted for approval as a correct record. Do we have any questions or comments relating to this particular minute? No. And B is the staffing subcommittee of the 12th of August. Do we have any question or comment regarding these minutes? So I take it we can take it that the minutes are accepted.
Agreed.
Agenda item number 4, which I'll just whiz it up here, is the Angus Integrated Children's Services Corporate Parenting Progress Report 2017 to 2021 and the Angus Promise Plan of 21 to 24. As I've intimated earlier, I would like to start this particular agenda item direct to appendix number 4 of this report on page 69. And just for the benefit, it is not a green paper. It is a paper that is marked confidential. So with regard to the confidentiality, I am of the committee until we have completed the agenda item. Are we agreed on this? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Can we now That we're back on live now? Okay, thank you. Excuse me. That Annex 4 was obviously just one part of a comprehensive report that is in front of us. Mark, would you like to expand upon the rest of the report?
Yes, thank you very much.
Will I open to questions and comments?
And again, many thanks from myself to the young people that are presented so eloquently and confidently to the committee. And again, many thanks to the committee, I think, for your very supportive questions and comments, and really encouraging on behalf of the Corporate Parenting Board to see that level of commitment to the promise and to the responsibility that we have for our care experienced young people. So genuinely really encouraged and kind of pleased to hear all that. The recommendations are pretty straightforward in terms of the previous progress report and to approve our promise plan. But I think probably the most important one, which is the one that has just been brought to life, is for the members of the committee to individually and collectively keep the promise. And I think that was one of the last comments that was made by Karen on behalf of the one of the young people, was really to hold that commitment. And as Councillor Proctor said, it's detailed on page 70 of the report. So I think it's a case of taking that commitment out of this meeting and out of this forum, and then how we reflect that in all the work that we do. And again, some of the comments that members made about being there and being accessible and being at the end of an email or a phone call is really encouraging to hear. But I'm happy, along with my colleagues, to take any questions on the report.
Thank you for that, Mark. Now open the floor to questions only, please. Questions. We'll save the comments till later, please. We start off with Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Mark. A really good report. Some of the Children and Learning Committee will realise that we've seen the reports at Scrutiny and Audit already, and it's really just a question about process. There seems to be a change in practice where the reports are renumbered on the second committee they're coming to. I quite liked it when they kept the original numbers, because it kind of flagged up the fact that it has been scrutinised before. We have questioned the officers and commented on the report. So I'm just wondering what the reason is for the change in process, really.
A bit lost there, Councillor Whiteside, and apologies, I've obviously not picked that up myself. I mean, if it's something in terms of how we reflect in kind of future reports, I can pick that up with the committee. But maybe if you could just give me a hand in terms of guiding me on what your question was about. Sorry.
Okay, the reports are numbered in order on this this agenda, but the report on corporate parenting and the Angus Promise Plan have already been scrutinised by the Scrutiny and Audit Committee, at which time they had a different number. Previously, when we've had instances like that, the number's been retained, and it kind of flags up that the report has been scrutinised already.
Yes, that may just be an oversight in terms of us preparing for this committee, but certainly if that helps members in future where reports are going to different committees, we can make life simpler by retaining the committee numbers. But I can pick that up with committee services out with this meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be most helpful, Mark. Now, Councillor Devine.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I mean, it was at Scrutiny and Audit, but there's a few things in it that I've picked up, which I would really like a bit of clarification about. I'm talking about on page 25. We are aware, I mean, I know we're aware that our exclusion rate for looked after children or care experienced young people is too high, and when we compare it with the Scottish average and our comparators, we are knowing that we need to do something about it. So I recognise that there's training going on with mainstream staff in schools. I just wondered if there is any neurodiverse training going on, because I'm pretty sure that a fair number of these exclusions are caused by people with these difficulties.
Thank you, convener. I would suggest probably Audrey Osborne might be best placed to respond to that.
Are you meaning training in terms of autism or ADHD? Yeah, that kind of training goes on in our schools all of the time. And obviously it's looking at individual needs of children and young people. Not specifically looking at exclusions in relation to that, but the numbers are quite small, so that would be easy to do in terms of looking at it, but it's all down to the individual planning around the young person. But there is a range of training that goes on in our schools along neurodevelopmental difficulties. I think it's also worth pointing out that when we're recording our exclusions, then on the CMIS system, they're recorded in terms of the number of openings, in terms of mornings and afternoons. And our own local guidance is not to have any informal or internal exclusions. And I'm not sure that every local authority does that. So, our numbers may be high and we're absolutely working on that as a priority. But also our schools don't do any internal or informal exclusions, and some local authorities may be following that practice. So, and also just in relation to the small number of young people, we just need to be careful around the data, and because of the small numbers, but it's absolutely a priority for us in education moving forward to reduce the number of exclusions and make sure that we're getting it right for our care experienced young people.
Thank you, Audrey. Does that answer your point, Councillor Devine?
Yes, it does. I do have another question, Convener, if I could be indulged.
Is it going to be a quick question?
It's another question, yes, page 30, about the enhanced team.
On you go.
See, the enhanced team was set up in 2019. I don't quite know when Hillcrest Futures got involved or Aberlour, but I can see this as a really good way forward of providing early intervention to families and allowing children to be kept at home and just to have the parenting skills to do that. So I wonder, I mean, obviously it's not a quick fix, but are you seeing any beneficial outcomes yet from this?
I'm happy to pick that up. I don't know what happened there. So yes, the enhanced team was established from within existing resources in the Children, Families and Justice Directorate at the point that we implemented our reorganisation in 2019. And then following on from that, we commissioned, or rather recommissioned, our family support services to much better align with our target outcomes, which are to avoid the breakdown of placements, whether they be placements within one's own family home or whether they're in looked after placements, as in arrangements that we have made for children and young people. Because obviously what we would rather have is children who are supported adequately to stay at home. But sometimes that is not in children's best interests, and equally we need to support them and whichever arrangement they are living in thereafter, to hold on to them, keep them safe, and to make sure that they grow and develop and enjoy the remainder of their childhood. So that's why we've invested in these different services, Councillor Devine, and what we recognised was that this was activity that we were doing already, and in part of the consultation both with children, young people, families and staff, we discovered that staff were often doing this at the weekends or overnight, providing short breaks in an emergency to try and support families to stay together and to ride out a period of acute crisis. But staff were doing that at the expense of supporting other families on their caseload for that period of time. So they were using the resources available to them, which was themselves, in order to deliver that kind of enhanced package of support. So we decided to carve a bit of resources and set it aside to support this specific function. And in doing that, we've enabled the team to be much more responsive without that being at the expense of their other business, if you like, because this is their business, this is their only focus. And we've seen some really good outcomes, including the return of children home after a period away, which is obviously quite difficult because there's a lot of reparation to be made in relationships there. But having that dedicated input has helped that. We've also had children and young people return home from a period in residential care, which again is quite a significant achievement for a family to get to that stage. And we're able to then wrap around different types of support to families when a child is returned home, because we appreciate that does not mean that it's the end of the need for support. The team have worked in partnership with Hillcrest Futures and also Aberlour, and they have open conversations about which team's approach might best meet that particular family's needs, so that there are not multiple services going in trying to deliver the same thing. So we're feeling the way a little with our Hillcrest Futures and Aberlour support, because that was only implemented about a year ago now. And so those services are bedding in, but the initial kind of feedback after the year of operation, a very strange year of operation, I have to say, given the COVID environment, but nevertheless, very strong feedback from young people who've accessed Hillcrest Futures. I saw a report on that this morning. Lots of strong feedback about the quality of relationships they're enjoying with workers, and no unplanned disconnects from the service, which I think is a really healthy measure. We've also had a really good uptake in the support that Aberlour are offering, and they routinely get positive feedback also on the quality of the service that they deliver. So at the moment, these services are looking like they're delivering to meet needs that we'd identified.
Okay, thank you, Catherine.
That's really heartening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bell?
Thank you, convener. Quick two questions. Yeah, don't worry. I'll be brief. I was just wondering if it would be possible to have more specifics in there around who does sit around the corporate parenting board, other stage of third sector and elected members, of openness and transparency. And I wanted to pick up on the bullet point on page 39 again, around supporting young people's relationships with people who are important to them, both within their families and with professionals. And I'm wondering, at what point does a professional who has an important relationship with a young person cease to become a professional and then become what I guess everyone else would regard as a friend, or almost like an informal auntie or uncle? That barrier between the professional role and the cared for person, is that a feasible part of growing up and growing and moving on?
Who would like to answer that, please?
Thank you. So, thank you very much for your question, Councillor Bell, and I'll certainly circulate to the committee the membership of the Corporate Parenting Board, but it does include all our partners that have either statutory or a kind of voluntary role and interest in the experiences and outcomes for our care experienced young people. And it's a very broad church, I think it's fair to say, as well as representatives of elected members from Angus Council who are on this committee. And it really does take its work very seriously. And I think the reflection that we've had today through the input from some young people, again, is work that board has been working on for a number of years through people like Karen, in terms of building relationships between the board and those young people. So that's great, heartening. In terms of your second question, if I could ask Catherine to come in on that matter.
Thank you for the opportunity to come in on this important but very complex issue. So there are very good reasons to maintain boundaries in a lot of cases, and we also need to be clear about people's engagement, which is on behalf of the council in delivering a function for which we are responsible and accountable, and something which is a personal contribution to a wider community. Some of which can be captured under some volunteering opportunities, and we have a number of staff who kind of straddle the boundary between their statutory role and some volunteering, befriending type capacities. And of course, there are occasions where staff form long and lasting relationships with children and young people, and indeed adults, that they support. Sometimes those relationships were actually in existence prior to the professional relationship, and we should also acknowledge the likelihood of that in a community like Angus, where some of our staff, particularly our support staff and our residential staff, are often local people, locally based people who know their communities and who have existing relationships and knowledge of situations. And so that there is a desirability to break down barriers, I'm sure, from young people's perspective, but there is also something quite important, to make sure that that's not an expectation and a requirement of staff either for their own mental health and well-being. And so we do need to help staff navigate that when those situations arise.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. And that ends the question section. We'll now move on to comments. And nobody's wishing to make a comment. So, colleagues, can I take it that this report 299/21, we agree recommendations 1, 2 and 3 as per section 1 of the report? Are these recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
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 Okay, right. Thank you, colleagues. We now move on to agenda item number 5, which is the education recovery use of COVID-19 staffing monies. And I understand that our Director of Education, Kelly McIntosh, will be speaking to this report.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I'd like to introduce agenda item 5, which is the latest in our education recovery report. You will remember that we've brought a series of reports over the last 18 months. And this report relates specifically to our use of temporary COVID-19 recovery funding, which was announced in May 2021. Councillors previously granted me delegated authority to plan the expenditure of this funding, and this report details that expenditure, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. The floor is open to questions. No questions? Oh, sorry. Councillor McMillan Douglas, go ahead, please.
Convener, thank you very much. I would like to ask a question of Kelly, please. If I go to, I think it's the top of page 73. It's the appendices anyway, dealing with cluster proposals, the summary of cluster proposals. And I was very heartened and pleased to see in Arbroath North there was going to be money spent on improving engagement in physical activity and sport. I was slightly surprised that that didn't appear in any of the other clusters. And I know this is something we've discussed and something which I'm very keen on. But should we take from this that there was a particular need in Arbroath North, and therefore all the other schools in Angus are okay as far as physical activity provision is concerned, or is there some other reason why this additional money was only going to be spent in Arbroath North?
Thank you for your question. One of the reasons that we allocated money to clusters was that obviously our schools have unique contexts and they know their school communities best and what their priorities and their needs are. So what they've needed for the children and families coming back in terms of recovery. I would note that from the Appendix Money-Feith cluster, the primary schools are also using money for Angus Alive with a focus on outdoor learning. So that is physical activity in another setting. And I would say that obviously all of our schools have programmes of physical education within their curriculum, and they all have, in our primaries more than our secondaries perhaps, the assistance and the work of our active schools workers and coordinators in our schools. So there's a lot going on anyway, and I'm presuming that Arbroath North and Money-Feith are using this money because they think in their context they would like something else. I think it's also important to point out that our schools also use their PEF funding to fund additional activity both through Angus Alive or through other organisations who are private and not members of the council. So this is just to augment that, I would suggest. I think the important thing is that our schools are being asked to measure the difference this is making. And when we look at that and review their plans and review the measurements, anything that we see as making a significant difference will make us look at how we do things on a universal basis differently in the future. Thank you. Thank
you, Kelly, very much. And yes, I'm so sorry I missed it. I obviously need a primer in reading. I see the point in Moneyfeast's synopsis. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Bell, followed by Councillor Proctor. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, convener, and thanks, Kelly. And I think, you know, at the start of the pandemic, we all had our, I guess, our expectations about the potential for harm that would befall. And all credit to you and your team around anticipating all of that and putting in place all the support structures that you did. As you've highlighted, our clusters know their patch really well. But I wondered if there are any surprises or issues that come out of the responses to the pandemic that you really didn't predict or expect, and how that's been addressed, perhaps, if there's been any need to address it at all. You know, the way people have responded in ways that you perhaps didn't anticipate. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, Councillor Bell, thank you for your question. And I know that you've raised this before and we've discussed it before. And you've heard me in committee before saying that certainly in Angus, we weren't buying into some of the stuff that was on social media nationally about, you know, the terrible loss of learning and how children and young people were lost. You know, you've heard me say in this forum before, they weren't lost, they were with their families when our schools were closed, and I think that's important to remember that. However, our schools were obviously looking out for differences in children in their presentation when they came back to school. We didn't have real face-to-face transition in many cases, in almost all cases. So all of our schools did extended transition as children entered first year and even entered the different stages in primary school. But we have canvassed our head teachers, and they are reporting that they've seen increased issues relating to mental health. They report these as being low level, and some of them are related to anxiety in relation to COVID, and also in not in relation to COVID, so just quite wide ranging. They are appreciative of the counselling service that's available across our schools now, of the work of educational psychologists and other third sector partners that help young people just generally with their mental health and well-being. Our schools have also noticed, and I think it's worth saying this, that this was quite short-lived and our schools have dealt with it very well. They have noticed that some children came to school in August. I'm going to say, don't quote me on this phrase, and I know that I'm going to get quoted on this phrase, but I kind of think of a better way of putting it. Had sort of forgotten how to behave in a school setting. And so there were some blips when some young people started, but obviously the systems that we have in our school for supporting young people are helping to iron that out. Some of that is in relation to stuff that's been happening in the community and has been brought into school, but it is always thus. You know, schools do get involved in things that are in the community. I am not hearing anything that suggests that we have a crisis in any particular area. And I think what we've been very good at, and I have to commend my colleague Catherine Lindsay's teams with this too, we worked collectively from day one when we locked our schools, and with our social work colleagues, with our health colleagues, and with our third sector colleagues and the volunteers across Angus to make sure that our children, young people and families were given every avenue of support that they could have. And thankfully, and I think it was really important, that continued throughout the summer with the Get Into Summer programme that was very heavily funded. And I think that's made a massive difference too. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. We now move on to Councillor Proctor.
Thanks very much, Convener. Kelly, I'm sure you'll answer this question in about 2 seconds flat. Could you, in page 72, paragraph 6-1 in the projected costs. We've got the extension of the sound reading system, 140k. Can you tell an old duffer like me what the sound reading system is?
I'm
actually
going to let my colleague Audrey Osborne explain that in a little bit more detail, because Audrey has been leading. Some work was done on this last year, and this is a continuation because of the success of it. You'll see that from the report, and Audrey's been heavily involved. So I'm going to ask Audrey to explain it a bit further. Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Language and reading, and we've got the sound reading system. So really, basically, it's an approach to teaching alphabetic code so that children learn the sounds. That means they can read and spell better. But it's not just for children that are struggling, it's a universal and holistic approach for all children that brings them on really quickly with their reading and their writing as well. So we had piloted it and done a test of change in Freecombe Primary School, starting with our ASN service and now expanding this out based on the data to show the improvement that it's had with learners. And now we're expanding that programme across all of our schools. There's a heavy evidence base from research, and we're working with Aberdeen University to evaluate the progress in this programme. Does that help?
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. I thought we were going to give all the kids a set of earphones.
No, not yet.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. We never stop learning, do we, Ronnie? That ends the questions. I'll now open the floor to comment. Okay, Councillor Devine, followed by Councillor Speed, and followed by Councillor Proctor.
Page 72 as well, Kelly. It's at 4.2. I just wanted to say how pleased I am to see the use of 12 EYPs in Primary 1. I think this will give a real boost learning through play. I'm actually quite keen on the idea, the European idea of children not actually going to school and learning to read until they're 16. But I think that this should help the children to speak, to get all the vocabulary that they need and explore ideas. And of course, I know that there's a lot of outdoor learning goes on. So thanks for putting these 12 additional EYPs in there. I think that will be a great boost.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Speed.
Thanks, convener. Sorry, it was more of a question. I just didn't get my hand up enough time when you moved on. Have I missed the boat?
Try and phrase it.
Sorry?
Try and phrase it.
It was just with regards to the sport and leisure activity and kind of wider and community engagement for children and young people. And it was around whether there would be provision to support children and young people who may kind of have additional barriers due to disability to overcome some of the physical access issues to environments and to participating in some of the kind of leisure activities that might be available. I don't know if any of the officers can comment on that.
I'm happy to come in there, Councillor Speed. What you see in the appendix is the initial plan from our schools, and as our central officers are going to help schools with the planning and with the measurement of the plans, and that's one of the things that we will be looking at, equality in general and equity issues. In relation to access, it's not related directly to this report, but another piece of work that our directorate are doing at the moment is looking at outdoor learning and accessibility issues, and I can assure you that we are aware that we have some issues in our schools just with accessing areas, and that is a priority for us to get that sorted out. I think Audrey also wants to come in and answer a bit of your question.
Okay, thanks, Kelly.
On you go, Audrey.
Thank you, Kelly. Councillor Speed, we've just put a survey out to our schools as the barriers are to accessing physical activity and physical exercise, so we can gauge, what schools need to make activities more accessible for young people. So that's just coming out to our schools, and then we'll analyse that and be able to look at addressing some of those barriers. So that's been taken forward within the ASN service.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Councillor speed. And that ends the comment section. So, colleagues, regards report 321. Do we agree the recommendations in section 1, numbers 1 and 2? Is the
Agreed.
report agreed? Right, thank you, colleagues. Thank you, colleagues. We now move on to agenda item number 6, is the expansion of free school meal support. And I understand that Beth Reader is going to introduce this report. Is that correct, Beth?
Yes, it is. Thank you, convener.
Okay, on you go.
I'm very pleased to present this report, which is an update on the expansion of free school meal provision. Members of the committee may be aware or will be aware that universal free school meals are being expanded to all children in primary 4 to 7 over the course of the next year. So this report sets out the steps that have been taken to support the initial phases of the rollout, which also includes increased provision as well for financial support during the holidays. So I've set out some information in the report about the work carried out to date, but also the next phases of that rollout, which will include P5 in January and then P6-7 next August. Some of the information is we don't have a huge amount of detail on yet, so we're anticipating that this will be the first in potentially a series of reports that will be brought on this topic. And I'm happy to take any questions that members will have.
Thank you, Beth. So the floor is open to questions, and first up we have Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, convener. The report touches a little, Beth, on capacity issues in dining halls. I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit more information about how easy that will be to resolve and whether we've got a plan in place for that. Thanks.
We do have plans where we've done some initial survey work of all of our dining halls to look at capacity, current capacity based on anticipated numbers using projected uptake. A lot of this is provisional at the moment. So where initial particular issues were identified, they've been resolved on a site-by-site basis. We're not aware of any schools kind of highlighting that they don't think they're going to be able to deliver this. But we're going to look at a range of different measures. So this could include purchasing new furniture. So there are alternative types of tables which are more space efficient. So we can look at putting those in place. We'll also be exploring whether we can make use of or increase the use of staggered lunchtime sessions. A lot of our schools are already doing that anyway in response to the pandemic. So it may just be a case that we continue the practice that's already in place. Members of my team are working closely with colleagues in Tayside Contracts to determine all of those details, and I would imagine the next report will have much more detail on that.
Can I just ask, thank you, Beth, and just a quick question from me, Beth. You mentioned the staggered meal times. When you did it earlier on, it was with smaller pupil numbers within the school. Would you have to extend the staggering times given now that you're back to full school attendance? Does that pose any additional problem?
It really does depend on the setting.
Okay.
Some of our schools will have all of the children in the dining hall anyway, so those who were perhaps currently having packed lunches, they may already be in the dining hall. So it's not as straightforward as there might not be enough space for everyone. It will really depend how each school is doing its lunch service already. Some of our smaller schools, it's unlikely to be an issue because the dining halls are kind of designed with the exact capacity of the school in mind. But we will be working closely with all of the colleagues that we need to work out where there are any particular issues, and we will bring that back to members for discussion should that be required. Okay, thanks, Beth. Point taken. Now we have Councillor Bell, followed by Councillor Devine.
Thank you, and thanks, Beth. I mean, it's good to see more free school meals. What sort of proportion of waste is factored into this and plan in place to help drive that down? It's obviously issues of sustainability and food availability and food waste are quite hot topics at the moment. Thanks.
It's not something that we've looked at particularly closely yet for this phase of the rollout. We have had an increased level of waste. I think it's fair to say partly to do with how the meal service in primary has been delivered in response to the pandemic. But we are working closely on reducing whatever that waste is, and Tayside Contracts, because we use a pre-order system, Tayside Contracts are preparing meals to order, so they're not anticipating it's 100% uptake or anything like that. There's a general drive that we're trying to push uptake of meals to the highest level it can be. So my team have been working with Tayside Contracts colleagues, but also those across Perth and Kinross and Dundee to look at the waste issue specifically. I can certainly ask one of my team to get in touch with you to give you some more details on that, if that would be helpful.
Thanks, Beth. Yes, I think that would be a helpful contact with Councillor Bell to inform of further information. That would be most helpful. Now, Councillor Speed. Oh, sorry, Councillor Devine. Councillor Devine.
Okay.
I beg your pardon.
Thanks. I'm just looking at page 84 and 4.6. Beth, it is disappointing that we can't see a year by year, especially as we roll it out. I mean, it would be really useful to see how it's going, and P4s, P5s, P6s take up the free lunches. So do you think somebody's going to be working on that in Tayside Contracts or somewhere else?
I am hoping so. So I think just to outline the system that the meal numbers are drawn from it's a legacy system that's that Tayside Contracts own, and it predates any universal free school meal provision at all, which is kind of why it's designed the way it is. We're looking through our online school payments project. So we've got an upgrade project underway at the moment, whether we can use that to improve the reporting capabilities. We should be able to do something, because if people are ordering meals through the system, even if they're not paying for them anymore, we should be able to determine some figures that way. So again, my team will be looking at that as we progress, because it is really important that we do know the numbers. And I think as the expansion continues to the older age groups, where anecdotally we think the uptake starts to drop off a little, it'd be helpful if we could have that information, kind of raw data, so that we can do that analysis and also engage with children as well around what the kind of barriers are to accessing the uptake. So we will be looking at that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Speed, followed by Councillor Macmillan Douglas. Councillor Speed.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I'm just seeking some clarity for those children and families who may be in receipt of being eligible for a free school meal, and for those that perhaps aren't in school, whether that be through exclusion, part-time table, or home learning, and just they also might be families who are financially challenged and indeed experiencing food poverty. How are we managing to meet those needs?
I've been engaging with colleagues within the legal department about that, because currently we don't have a policy in place. So we've been exploring what our legal requirements are as an authority. And again, I'm bumping everything onto my team here, but again, my team are going to be looking at this over the coming months in conjunction with colleagues in the legal service, because we're aware that we need to have a policy for this. It's something that's been highlighted as well in the context of kind of longer term absence as well. So it's something that we're aware of, and I think we may see an increase in people inquiring about this as well now that the provision's being extended. So we will certainly be investigating, and I would imagine we'd be bringing an update back to this committee as well on that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to ask that, convener. Would be looking to bring an update report on that policy at our next meeting?
No, I think Beth actually said it would take a lot longer than that, because it still has to go through the legal process.
Okay, but an update report perhaps.
Yeah, but there'll be one coming in the future, Councillor Speed, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right, yeah. Councillor Macmillan Douglas.
Thank you, convener. I want to ask a question, or perhaps 1.5 questions, of Beth, please. Firstly, are you content that Tayside Contracts give us the quality of food that, and secondly, are Tayside Contracts using locally produced food? Because this not only would be good food, but also it would help the education of where food comes from and the cohesion within our community.
So in terms of the quality,
excuse me, Beth, can I just interject here? This report is about the expansion of free school meals. It's not about the quality of the food, which I think has been in the press a lot recently. To this end, there are talks going on between Tayside Contracts and other associated or interested parties. So I do not want to get into a situation where we're making any judgments prior to any outcomes or agreements that any talks produce. That's my view on it. So I'm not happy with.
Okay, convener, I bow to your superior judgment, but perhaps we could leave this hanging for another occasion. Thank you.
Okay. That ends the question sections, colleagues. Now I'll open the floor to comment. As there are no comments, so we'll just for report 30121, the recommendations, the three recommendations in section 1. Do we agree with the report? Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. We now move on to agenda item number 7, which is the Children's Social Work Statistics Overview Report. Catherine, is anybody going to introduce this report?
I'm going to give my colleague Beth Reader the opportunity to say a couple of words of introduction, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, convener. Delighted to present the first overview report of children's social work statistics. I won't go into too much detail about the data that's in the report, as you will have had that in the papers, but it's just to outline that this is the first time we've brought a report of this nature to committee for consideration. So we're obviously interested to hear the feedback, but obviously take any questions on the data as well.
Okay, that's the floor open to questions now. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, convener. I think it's a really helpful report, Beth. Thank you, and I think you'll probably find it evolves over time, but it's a really valiant first go. So thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions in relation to terminology in the paper that would be helpful, I think, for all of us to hear. Pages 98 and 99 in the charts, there's a category in other community, and on page 103 in the table there's a category other concern, which looks quite a few incidents around those other concerns. And I know the paper says that that requires more investigation and analysis, but I was just wondering if there was any early indication about what's going on in that category as well. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm happy to come in and respond to those questions, Councillor Bell. So firstly, in relation to the other community placement definition, this is set by Scottish Government, and the examples that we are provided with are, for example, supported accommodation or with prospective adopters. Now, we've checked against the individual cases that were captured on our return for this last year, and this return included children who, for example, had their legal status as accommodated under Section 25 or with a child protection measure, but were in the care of Ninewells Hospital, for example, so children who we'd taken protective measures against but were being looked after in a hospital setting because of their injury, or another organisation, and that could be a similar setting in another area, specialist hospital, for example, that we just don't have the detail of on our individual local system, and also that we had a number of children who were placed with prospective adopters at the time of our return. So that's what's broadly covered in there. I know it's not very helpful having other categories, but it does allow workers just to capture placements that don't fit someplace else in this scheme. In terms of the category on page 103, this is for child protection registration and when children and their families attend a case conference because there are concerns about a child's safety. Social workers are asked to basically tick a box in the system that gives an indication of what the concerns are or were at that time. Now, a number of our families have a range of different issues that present at that time, and the risk is very rarely just one risk. So sometimes, unfortunately, social workers just tick one box, sometimes they tick multiple boxes, and I understand that the other category also includes sometimes where staff think, well, I'll tick other because it's more than one thing. So when we say in the report that this requires a little bit of refinement, it certainly does require a little bit of refinement if we are wanting to use this data specifically for any kind of analytical purposes. But I think that the quality of that particular data set on a national basis is also not that strong. So we wouldn't be able to do very meaningful comparisons around that. The primary focus, of course, when we go to a case conference isn't so much the data collection, it's more about the right outcomes for the individual family that's concerned. And so that's where the social worker's focus tends to be, rather than the recording system, which obviously then allows us to have these conversations at committee. Beth, I'm conscious that it's your team that have the joy of pulling the data off the system, and I don't know whether you would want to add anything to the data quality processes that we're implementing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. We now go to Councillor Whiteside, to be followed by Councillor Proctor. Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, convener, and thanks for the report. There's loads and loads of information in there. There could be loads of questions coming out of that. I just had a little question around the exclusions, and I know Audrey's touched on that already, and some of the figures might be in relation to data gathering methods, etc. My question is more around families and carers of people who are excluded. I mean, when the young people are out of school, is there any support? Is there any activities to keep them busy or out of any further trouble, or what actually happens to them?
I'm happy to take that. Councillor Whiteside, thank you. I think, first of all, it's really important to mention our exclusion guidelines at the moment do say that head teachers need to very carefully consider any thought that they're having about excluding a child who is looked after, and should consider discussing that with their service leader. And although the table on page 111, the primary school exclusions, when you look at those numbers, they look big. The actual numbers of incidents are small. They're still too big, and we appreciate that. And when a child is excluded, in the olden days before learning, they would get a little pack of work home to do at home. Is obviously learning will always be available online. So although a child is excluded from school, we don't want them not to do any learning, and we've always provided learning in the past. Being at home is, you know, whether the parent is able to help them with that learning. But again, there is always access via email to someone in the school. And I think it's also important to say that regardless of whether a child is looked after or not, we want to get all of our exclusion rates down, and we have moved to a system where exclusions are shorter than they were previously. So sometimes it's half a day, you know, I would say that 2 days and 3 days, and that date is not here, and it's maybe something that we would consider, Beth, for the future, because we've been having a lot of discussions since this paper was published, because when you read it, you do think, oh, maybe we could do this and maybe we could do this. So I think it's also important to recognise that we are trying not only to reduce exclusions, but to keep them as short as possible to allow the process for readmission to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Catherine, excuse me, Councillor Whiteside. I just saw Catherine's hand go up there. Was that in relation to some of the comments that Kelly made?
Yes, it was just to supplement.
Are you okay with Councillor Whiteside for Catherine to come in before you respond? Councillor Whiteside.
Yeah, I was just thanking Kelly for her answer. That was really helpful.
Okay, yeah, so Catherine, on you go. Thank you.
I just wanted to draw councillors' attention to our work that we do with the LAC Attainment Challenge funds as well. So Kelly spoke about the largely schools-based approach there, and the Children, Families and Justice Service have worked in partnership with the Education and Lifelong Learning Service to develop a multidisciplinary inclusion support team. So whilst it's not specifically about working with children and young people who have been excluded, obviously that's a resource that those children and young people can also access. And obviously part of our wider kind of support services that we spoke about earlier would also get involved in these cases if that was appropriate and helpful too. So there are resources that can be pulled together, and they are pulled together in a child's plan, and families can access what is necessary. Is that consistent across the board in every case? I suspect it isn't, and there's work that we can do there, and that's why this is an area for improvement for us.
Thank you, Catherine. We now move to Councillor Proctor, to be followed by Councillor Brace. Councillor Proctor. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Convener. Sorry, it took me a while to get my mic switched on. Just on, it's on page 96, we're talking about the number of children looked after. And although the report says in Scotland generally that the number of children being looked after has gone down slightly, in Angus we've gone up between 2019 and 2020 up by 8.6%, whereas in Murray they've gone down 10.5%. Is that sort of increase? Do we think that is going to be ongoing, or is this maybe just something that's been COVID related or a blip? I know there are other local authority areas which are in the same sort of boat as us, and Dundee've kind of gone down, and Perth and Ross have stayed the same. But what's the sort of feeling on that?
Thank you for your question. So I guess there are a couple of bits there. So firstly, yes, the percentage increase in Angus is not favourable compared to some other local authority areas. So we're up 11% from 2016 numbers, and 6% is the overall kind of Scottish increase, reduction in that time. So we've gone up and the Scottish average has gone down. But I think the more helpful comparison figure is the per thousand population figure, in relation to which you'll see that chart number 2 shows that the Angus is only above Perth and Kinross in our kind of local comparison there. So we have 12.5 children per thousand population who are looked after. The number is quite small, so fluctuations in that number obviously cause significant percentage variations. But the rate of looked after children in Angus is not high, comparatively speaking. The rate in Scotland is circa 14, and obviously the rate in Dundee, which is the green line at the top of chart 2, remains significantly higher, although they've had a fairly steep decline. And that just reflects different patterns in the usage of the different processes through which children and young people and families can be supported, and the variation across the country in relation to the level of need, which is concentrated more typically in areas where there are higher levels of poverty and deprivation.
Thank you very much for that,
Catherine.
Thank you.
Okay, we now move to Councillor Brace, to be followed by Councillor Speed. Councillor Brace.
Yes, thanks, Convener. This follows on from Councillor Whiteside's question answered by Kelly, where she said that when pupils are excluded, they used to be provided with little work packs. Now it's all online, of course, in the digital age. And I just wondered, do we make sure that the excluded pupils do have access to the necessary hardware to make sure they can access this online? I think maybe Catherine touched on this sort of, that there's a broad approach to this, but I just wanted reassurance that they can actually get access online.
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Councillor Brazen. I'm really confident that given that we had to close our schools to most children and young people during the pandemic and provide devices to allow them to access the internet at home and to access their learning at home, although some young people with a return to full-time education may have returned those devices, the schools know who would need them in the event of them not being at school. And very soon, hopefully, we will take delivery of enough devices to give every child a device. Mm-hmm. Again, it's not just about having the device, it's the connection to the internet and having enough data. And that's something that we provided within the last year too. So schools also know that we have the capability, if that was required to be funded, that we have the capability to do that also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. And we now move to Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thank you. Again, it was in relation to the exclusions, and just kind of thinking ahead to the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, and the kind of further impact that may have on children and young people who are excluded, but also their right to be involved in the decisions that are made around them. Is that likely to, you know, kind of impact in terms of the child going to be able to say, actually, I want to be in school? Is that a type of scenario that's likely to come up? And my other kind of thoughts around kind of the further reporting on these statistics is that it's not due back for another year yet, but I'm just kind of conscious of our promise and our agreement to that. I know that there's a huge amount of work goes into kind of collate this data and statistics, but would it be too much to perhaps have an earlier site than annually and perhaps kind of 6 monthly?
Hi, Councillor. I'm happy to take Councillor Speed. I'm happy to take the first part of your question, and I would say that the very fact that exclusion has generated so many questions today shows what a difficult topic it is. You know, I think it's important that I stress that exclusion is an absolute last resort. Our head teachers do not relish having to make that decision, and they recognise the impact that it has on the child and very often their family, because if their family are having not to go to work to be at home to look after a child, and if that child happens to be in care, then it has ramifications for that care placement at times. So it's not a decision that's taken lightly. It is a decision that's taken by adults, and I consider the point that you've made about, you know, what if the child's saying, well, I want to be in school, but before the decision's taken, our schools really do undergo a restorative process with children and young people when things are breaking down. So the amount of support that goes in to support a young people to be able to stay in school, I am confident that the exclusion is made when there's nothing else available. And sometimes the child's needs means that actually being in that location at that time is not the right thing for them. I think we'll have to be honest about that. There are very few occasions, they are just few, but it's not right for the child to be in the environment at that time. And I think it's also at the readmission meeting, the child is in attendance and is given full opportunity to speak about what they thought resulted in the exclusion, how they felt about it, what could have helped support them further, and what needs to happen to allow them to be successful in coming back into school. Because, you know, that's actually, for me, once the decision's been made and the child has been excluded, that's the really important bit. How do we make it so that coming back into school, the child is as supported as possible and can continue with their learning? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. The second part of Councillor Speed's question, I take that's you, Catherine.
So my colleague Beth Reader is going to come in on the feasibility of more frequent reporting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Councillor Speed, for the question. So we do have the option of pulling data on a more frequent basis, exclusions and attendance as well, although we haven't really touched on that today. So as part of the performance-led council approach, I've been supporting both the Education Directorate and the Children, Families and Justice Directorate, and we're looking at smaller sets of data that we can start reporting on a more frequent basis that would be helpful. So we're still determining kind of how that needs to look and what the format will be. So it may not be the format of the report that's been brought today, but we may see if we can present in a slightly more interactive, user-friendly way on a more regular basis that might perhaps show information termly, I think might be more reasonable, or 6 monthly, whatever is felt appropriate. So my teams will be working on that as well as we go on.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Beth.
Just a question from me, Beth, on the actual reporting. It says that you present a report of statutory performance annually. Do I take it that the annual report is a set piece of work to conform to requirements, whereas interim reports can be a bit more fluid in the content? Would that be fair to say, or would you just keep it the reporting format the same throughout?
I can see that Catherine's put her hand up. I mean, my view would be that we would look at alternative approaches rather than producing a formal report like this. But Catherine, did you want to come in and answer?
Yes, I can do. These are the statutory lack and child protection statutory returns that we are required to submit every year as a council to Scottish Government. And what that does is allow them to compile that and produce the data report that you see referred to here, which covers the whole of Scotland, and they publish local authority, individual local authority tables for comparison purposes. This is the first time we've presented that full report in this way to the council. What we tend to do is include all of these measures in the Chief Social Work Officer annual report, or at least the majority of them are also referenced there, because obviously they speak to the content, the volume, the quality of social work intervention. However, what we did feel this year when the report was published at a national level, we felt that it would be quite helpful for elected members to have that laid before you, so that you can see how the numbers and the trends and the performance looks in Angus compared to other areas, both our benchmarked areas, our local partnership areas across Tayside, and the wider Scottish picture, because it allows you to undertake some more scrutiny as corporate parents of these functions. Now, in terms of the piece of work that Beth is discussing around the performance-led council approach, what we're really keen to do is not bombard elected members with lots and lots of bits of data all of the time. What we would like to do is draw out some of these key data sets and look at how frequently it would be helpful for elected members to see them. As Beth says, probably not in a report that then allows any comparison to other areas, because they will only be reporting this data on an annual basis, in a published format. So for comparative purposes, you'll only see the annual report, but for our kind of interim updates, you would see what the Angus position looks like, so that we could track our own trends over time. And then at the annual review point, you'll be able to see how that maps to the Scottish picture more generally, and our comparator authorities, etc. I hope that explains a little better what the intention is.
Okay, Catherine, I understand that completely, and I follow and agree with what you're saying there. Okay, that's the question section ended. We now move open to comment. Councillor Speed, is that?
Well, yeah, it kind of was there and then it came down. It was a bit of a legacy, but yeah, I was probably just thinking on the responses there. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of provide a further comment, if that was okay. With regards to the report, and I mean, I think it would be helpful to see kind of more regular than this annual reporting on the statistics and trends, so that we can indeed ensure that in terms of our commitment to the promise that, some of that information is very linked to it. So it would be good to compare against, our own kind of performance, how we are improving or not, so that we can obviously scrutinise better than just annually.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Speed. And as there are no further comments, report 30221, do we agree recommendations 1 and 2 of said report? Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you, colleagues. We now move on to agenda item number 8, which is the National Transfer Scheme, Section 69 of the Immigration Act of 2016. States your report, Catherine, but are you nominating anybody to introduce?
No, sadly, my colleague Eunice McLennan's unable to be with us today, so you're having to listen to me again in relation to this report. So you'll see the report outlines some fairly significant changes to the National Transfer Scheme, which is a UK-wide scheme announced by the UK government on the 10th of June. And there are a significant number of implications then for Scottish local authorities, including our own. There's been some further previous discussion at full council in relation to this matter, and at that stage our advice was to await the publication of this revised scheme and some further clarity around the financial position and support that would be made available to Scottish local authorities to implement. In essence, where we are at the moment is COSLA have approached every local authority in Scotland and asked us operationally to confirm whether or not we are in a position now to participate in the National Transfer Scheme. And what that means is that we would become a local authority who accept unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who have landed, for the want of a better word, arrived perhaps in other local authority areas across the United Kingdom. The majority of young people who are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children arrive on the south coast, often Kent. You will have seen significant media coverage of that particular local authority and the pressures that they are facing at the moment over the last weeks and months. So we have been doing some work operationally on what this might look like if we were to participate, and this report outlines our tentative thinking around that, the mechanisms that we could use without huge additional kind of infrastructure and investment being necessary to get us started, which then would allow us to take a cohort of 2 to 3 young people at a given time, so that we have at least a bit of resilience and capacity in terms of the support that those children and young people may need wrapped around them. Unfortunately, it's not possible to be very clear about exactly how much money this kind of approach will cost us, because we don't know what the needs of the young people will be until such time as they arrive. We've spoken a lot today about our commitment as corporate parents, and if we agree this report today, we would see an increase in the number of our looked after children's population, because all of our unaccompanied asylum seeking children would become de facto our corporate children in Angus, and we would have that commitment and responsibility for them until into their adulthood. So this is a long-term commitment for the council, and the report, I hope you'll be able to approve today, outlines our thinking of how we can approach that. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Catherine. The floor is now open to questions. No questions are forthcoming, so I'll open the floor to comment. And neither are any comments. So, colleagues, report 30331, do we agree the recommendations in section 1, items 1 to 4 of the said report? Agreed?
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. We now move to agenda item number 9, which is the Implementation Age of Criminal Responsibility Act, Scotland 2019. I have, Catherine, are you going to nominate someone for this one?
Yes, I'm delighted to be able to hand over to Alan Hope, who's the author of the report, to take you through this particular development. But just before Alan gets started, I should point out that there has been a slight change since the publication of this report, and we have had notification that the Act will not come into place in October this year. We are still awaiting a final date for that, but it is anticipated that it will be fairly imminent, but the October date has moved slightly. At that point, I'm going to hand over to Alan to take you through the implications nevertheless. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment, if you will, Catherine. So, but as you say, the information that you've just imparted upon the implementation date of the Act, it does not detract from the body of the report itself.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Alan Hope, I had you penciled in. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Delighted. As Catherine said, it's been delayed. The main premise of the report is to increase the age of criminal responsibility to 12 years old, and it puts in specific requirements for those aged 8 to 12. The two that are contained in the report are where it impacts on the local authority, so that you will see we be obliged to provide a place of safety in certain circumstances. It's the police that determine, but it's to the local authority to provide that. We are also obliged in specific circumstances to complete a joint investigative interview with a young person. That's an interview conducted by the police and a trained social worker. So those are the two kind of main impacts. Response and plan to address those issues are. You'll also see, I think, in the report, we don't anticipate demand to be particularly high, and we'll also draw your attention to the fact that we anticipate in years to come the age of criminal responsibility may be raised again, which would have a more significant impact upon our service, particularly given that we have not been given additional resources to meet that. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, now the floor is open to questions. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, convener, and thanks, Alan. I'm pleased to support this paper. I just wondered if you could maybe tease out for us what kinds of places might be places of safety, and might that be different for each young person?
That would be our intention, Councillor Bell. I think there was some drive from police to get just a definitive list of places of safety. Now, we've steered away from that because we believe there needs to be some assessment as to the child's individual needs, and we would seek to find a placement that would match those needs at the time required. The law, I think, is still filtering through, I suppose, in that we might be able to use a family member's address as a place of safety, for example, which is, confusingly, there's a place of safety term within the Children's Scotland Act. These are not the same. So this is a place that could be used for 24 hours only.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, my question was pretty much similar. It was just seeking clarity with regards to that safe place, and I'd obviously noted in the report that we weren't going to kind of provide the listings of where they might be. But I guess my concerns were just around, you know, should those occasions arise, should there be an incident, and then there would be confusion or a lack of kind of clarity as to where that safe place then might be, especially if there isn't any kind of family that are able to provide that.
Okay, we've discussed that locally with Police, Councillor Speed, so they have specific contact details and we would seek to establish a place of safety. They've identified within their own resources a place of safety as well for out of hours response. I suppose the bit, if I can give you any reassurance, is it would be a similar circumstance just now if, for instance, we were seeking a child protection order where you've got immediate risk to a child. We wouldn't know at that point. We have to establish and assess. So we need to gather information to find out the best placement for someone anyway. So it's kind of analogous to that. We're also, I suppose, hopeful that the demand will be very low. Certainly in discussion with the police, and the police have estimated this slightly higher than we would. They anticipate 237 such cases across Scotland. So proportionately, we would anticipate very few in Angus. Of course, you know, Murphy's Law, the chances are we'll either not get you for 3 years or 2 in the first week. That's generally how these things work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. No more questions. Anybody got any comment? No comments being raised. So colleagues, can I take it that the report 30431 The two recommendations in section 1 of the report are agreed.
Good.
Agreed. Right. Thank you, colleagues. We now move to agenda item number 10. It concerns the Platinum Jubilee 2022 exemption request. And I understand that Beth Reader is going to introduce this report. Beth?
I am. Thank you, convener. This report is seeking permission from the committee to seek an exemption from the statutory requirement to provide 190 days of schooling in session 21-22. The reason that the exemption is being requested is to support the council's planning for the Platinum Jubilee holidays, which are scheduled for June 2022. So this is one part of the. My understanding is that further information has been brought back to another committee about this, but this report was just to enable us to do some specific bits in relation to education. So it's all set out in the report. If there's any questions, please let me know.
Okay, thank you very much, Beth. First question is from Councillor Duff.
Convener, can I give you notice of an amendment, please?
Certainly, Councillor Duff. Sarah, has it been circulated to Sarah yet?
It's a very simple amendment. I'll read it out to you, convener. The amendment is to agree 1-1, but not agree 1-2. Is that clear?
Yes, I understand. 1-1, yes. 1-2, no.
And I can give you some reasons behind that.
Yeah, well, I think that would be helpful as an explanatory, so we know where we go from here.
So we're agreeing 1-1. We're not agreeing 1-2, and that's to allow these decisions to be taken by elected members at the appropriate time, depending on the circumstances. I think the public expect elected members to have a say on these matters in terms of school holidays, and I think we would be absolving our responsibility if we agreed 1-2.
Well, thank you, Councillor Duff. I take it you have a seconder for your amendment?
I think I do, yes.
Who is it?
Yes, I'll second that amendment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bell. Sarah, I think we have 2 points. 2 points here. We have a motion and an amendment.
Yes, convener. I'm presuming that you yourself will be moving the recommendations in the report.
Yes, I will. But before I go on, can I still have Councillor Proctor with his hands raised here in case he has a view on this? Councillor Proctor? Councillor Proctor?
Yes, it's okay. Convener, no, I was going to bring up a comment, actually, and I'm quite happy to vote, you know, for the motion or the amendment when it comes forth. Then I'll make my comment, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Proctor. So, Sarah, it looks like we're just going to go to a vote for motion or amendment.
Convener, I wonder if it might be more appropriate to hear the comments in advance of the vote being taken.
Mm-hmm.
That mean allow members then to make any decision that they would wish to.
No, well, I think Councillor Proctor indicated that he would rather make a comment after the vote.
Okay, convener, if you wish to go to the vote, I would have to ask if you've got a seconder for the motion.
Sorry, say again, Sarah?
Do you have a seconder for the motion, convener?
I'll second it.
Sorry, was that Councillor Brown?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members, the motion by the convener, seconded by Councillor Brown, is to approve the recommendations in the report. The amendment by Councillor Duff, seconded by Councillor Bell, is to approve the recommendation 1.1 only. Please vote motion or amendment. Convener?
Motion.
Councillor Bell?
Amendment.
Councillor Braze?
Amendment.
Councillor Brown?
Motion.
Councillor Devine?
Amendment.
Councillor Duff?
Amendment.
Councillor Lumgear?
Motion.
Councillor McMillan Douglas,
Motion.
Councillor McLaren,
Motion.
Councillor Miles, Councillor Nicholl,
Motion.
Councillor Proctor,
Motion.
Councillor Speed,
Amendment.
Councillor Whiteside.
Amendment.
Mr. Summers, I'm not sure if Mr. Summers is still on the call. Mr. Summers? Mr. Callahan? Mrs. Chee?
Abstain.
Okay, convener, based on the members present at the time the roll call vote was taken, the motion is carried by 8 votes to 6.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Councillor Proctor, would you now like to raise your comment?
Yeah, thanks very much, convener. And my comment is really irrespective of whether the motion or the amendment fell, but I think it's only right and proper that we support these recommendations, because I do feel that the Platinum Jubilee in 2022, Her Majesty the Queen has actually, been our Queen for the past 70 years. Not only has she been our Queen, but she's a mother, a granny, and a great granny. And I think she would be talking about young people here today. And I think Her Majesty is a great exemplar to young men and young women, boys and girls, coming up. She's certainly somebody that I think that others can look up to and a good role model. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Proctor. Any other comment? Well, I'd just like to say, as far as I'm concerned, Her Majesty has been an exemplar of statecraft and regality in how to run a country. It's been tremendous. And it's also, well, I'll make a little thing here for Montrose, that the local sculptor, well-known sculptor, William Lamb, made a bust of Princess Elizabeth as she was then, which can still be seen in the William Lamb studio in Montrose. So thank you, colleagues. As there are no further comments, as regards report 30531, do we agree with recommendations 1 and 2 as highlighted in the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you, colleagues. And that ends today's agenda, which I think we can all agree has been highlighted by this talks that we had from the young people, which is very informative, and it's something I would like to see a lot more of, that we actually understand the outcomes young people face as they progress through into their teens. I see Councillor Bell, sorry I missed you there.
Yeah, sorry, I had a comment to make on that last paper, convener.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just, I agreed with Councillor Duff around having political oversight onto these decisions, and I am aware that the Scottish Government has supported this particular holiday. However, I have had feedback from some parents, and it's quite ironic.
Councillor Bell, we've accepted the report. We don't need to go to the avenue.
But you allowed me to speak because I had a comment. You didn't see my hand up.
Yes,
so
well,
I just wanted.
Came up after I started speaking, but the report has been agreed. There's no point.
Well, I'm not unpicking that decision. I just wanted to give some feedback from parents.
You can maybe do that at another time. I don't think this is the time or place to do that. The report has been agreed and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Councillor Starrick, he allowed Councillor Proctor to speak after it was agreed.
Absolutely.
Councillor Braze indicated he's this decision earlier before the vote that he wished to speak after the vote had been taken, which he duly did, and which I allowed. And I do not see anything wrong with that. I think you're just complaining for the sake of complaining.
No, I'm not.
So
I'm
I
not.
should say the meeting is now adjourned.
Councillor Bell clearly had her hand up before you adjourned the meeting.
Is that us?
I think so. Bye, everyone.